sentences from John chapter 11, where our Lord says, I am the resurrection and the life. Those who believe in me, even though they die, yet will they live. And everyone who lives and believes in me will never die. Let's begin with a short word of prayer, shall we? Holy God, Lord of life and death, you made us in your image. You hold us in your care. We thank you for gathering us today in memory of our friend George, for the gift of his life, for the love and mercy that he's received from you and gave to us. Especially, we praise you for your love in Jesus Christ, who died and rose from the grave to free us from evil and to give us life eternal. Grant that when our time on earth is ended, we might be united with all the saints in the joys of your eternal home through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. Scott, would you come?
I just gave a little pep talk to the family. We cannot be sad today. You're looking all sad. Don't be sad today. He didn't want us to be sad today, so I'm just going to preface that before I get into this. So thank you, Chaplain Carter. Our father is very proud that you're here to officiate this for us. And thank all of you for being here. It's a great honor for him. Before I begin to share my thoughts about our dad, I also need to thank someone. Breathe. Donna. You took such great care of Dad, and you lived the vows in sickness and in health till death do us part stronger than anyone I have ever witnessed. Thank you for being such a great wife and a partner and making his passage very graceful. So thank you. I also want to thank all my siblings and their spouses, their kids, their grandkids for being there when Dad needed them. Everybody really rallied around him in his last days. Being there for Donna and being there for each other. So a few little sibling fights, but not many. So thank you. And also a big thank you to all of Dad's friends and neighbors that not only came by to offer assistance in his last days and to say their goodbyes and comfort the family during the difficult time, but I also want to thank you because you created the fabric that was his life. He lived for 89 years on this planet, and you created that life for him. That's the way he looked at it. I say that because people and what they were made of were Dad's passion. If you could do me a favor and take your program today and take a look at it, the words on the inside under his picture are words that he wrote with the date. And it was always about the importance of people. And if you turn the program over on the back, there's some more words that he wrote. And it was always about the importance of people. Billy Pierre, who is here, we used to call him the G.W. Pearls of Wisdom. He wrote so many thoughts like that, and you're going to see them dispersed around the chapel and funeral home here. These are just a few that we're going to share, but you'll see more as you mingle after the service. And I want to make sure again that everyone understood his greatest request. One, it was that everybody wear bright colors. I happen to be wearing one of his shirts. He was a very colorful guy. And he wanted to make sure that we were celebrating a life well lived and challenges that he overcame and the humorous stories that he told us all. So I will also say that over the last few years, actually, and especially the last few weeks, I've thought about this day, and I've thought about what I would say. Breathe. You know, we all go through sorrow, and we all go through great joy, and it's important that we do that. But I also believe that it's really important that we understand the pivotal moments in a person's life and how they define you, and how they make you who you are. And this is a moment for me that I recognize. Delivering the eulogy at your father's funeral is, I would say, a defining and pivotal moment, to say the least. And I'm thrilled to be able to do it, so thank you. Okay, do me a favor, raise your hand if our dad ever said these words to you. Hey, let me tell you a little story. I would say that if you didn't raise your hand, you're at the wrong service. Most of his stories were about a challenge that he faced and how he managed to make lemonade out of lemons. He used to say that all the time. And the stories were often laced with Southern colloquialisms that he made an art out of those. All of them were very descriptive, some of them a bit obscure. Some of them made you stop and ponder the essence of their meaning. Some cannot be repeated here. Those that can be repeated here will be. I'll share that with you. So, let me tell you a little story about him. G.W. Horton was born in 1923 in Kershaw, South Carolina, the third of 4 children. His dad was a farmer and a laborer at the Springs Cotton Mill in Kershaw. Dad would always tell us during those early years how poor they were. And remember, he was born in 23, so he grew up during the Depression, right? In South Carolina. He used to say, Scott, we were so poor. We didn't have a pot to piss in or one to throw it out. And he would tell us that he and his little brother Nick would have to huddle together in one bed just to stay warm at night, with the wind whistling through the cracks in the siding of the house. And it would make them shiver under the covers, and they had to stay together just to keep warm. They didn't have any running water. They had no indoor plumbing, and only a well pump in the front yard to get water with. They had an outhouse about 30 yards from the house. And when you hear that kind of a story from your father, when you're growing up, you tend to treat it with a bit of skepticism, kind of a grain of salt. You know, it's the old story about I walked to school barefoot both ways uphill in the snow. And it wasn't until I was in my 30s that I was actually able to go visit his childhood home. Linda and I got to go down there. And we went to see his sister Ruby and brother Nick in Kershaw, and they lived in Lancaster at the time. And I managed to convince Aunt Ruby to take us out to the house. And I just wanted to see it. I'd heard about it. I wanted to see if there really were cracks in the siding. And so as memory serves me, we drove and drove and drove deep into the back country, down a dirt, grassy road and driveway, until we came to this clearing where the house still sat. And there was a pump in the front of the house to pump water. The outhouse was still functional, as far as I knew. There wasn't a single power line to that house anywhere that you could see. And as we drove up and approached the house, an elderly woman opened the door. And you can ask Linda if I'm embellishing this at all later. And she opened up the front door, I'm sure, to see who the heck was driving up her driveway, because I'm sure she didn't ever have any visitors. And as she stepped out onto the front porch, at least a half a dozen little pigs came running out of the house. And our Aunt Ruby, my dad's older sister, who was a very, very wise woman, said, I need to get out and I need to talk to this woman in our language, because this is the Deep South. And she said, because I'm sure she doesn't know what the heck's going on, and I need to let her know what's going on. So Ruby got out and had a conversation, and the next thing I know, she kind of waved us out, and we got to walk around the property. And I would tell you that it was all there. It was all there. The outhouse, the water pump. The place was dilapidated. There were cracks in the siding of the house. And we left after getting to look around a little bit. And we got back in the car. And I swear to you, this was with the most sincerity she could muster, and she was being sincere because she wasn't a joker like that. And Ruby says, "My, it just looks way better than when we lived here." It wasn't really until that moment that I understood he wasn't embellishing his story. It was next door to that same house where there was a field that he used to have to plow as a young man to pay the rent for the house they lived in. And the deal that his father had struck with the next door neighbor and the landlord was that my 10-year-old son will plow your field if you let us have this field and live in this house. And so they did. And this is where one of those more obscure sayings and colloquialisms comes into play. And he used to tell me that when he was a young man, a young boy, that he had to use a mule's ass for a compass. Now, I'm going to let you think about that, and I'm going to explain, because it took me years to figure out what the heck that really meant. That he had literally had to plow 3 acres of field with a mule and a wooden plow dragging behind that mule at 10 years old. And that had to be brutal. And I don't know how often you plow a field, but I'm sure it was quite often. So Dad lost his mother when he was 12, and believe it or not, life got tougher after that. He grew up into his teen years with his best friend, and you're going to see a slideshow after this when we're all done. And I want you to pay particular attention to the very first picture of the 2 little boys. His best friends, again, this is not embellished, his best friends growing up were Sweet Pea Uten and Wormy Payne. When you go down south, the headstones are, you see the Utens and the Paynes. And his entire family, when he was a teenager at that point, was working in the cotton mill. And it didn't take him long to figure out that that was not the life he wanted. It was 1941, and he was just 17. And as circumstances would have it, he got caught playing poker with his buddies in Kershaw, Sweet Pea Uten and Wormy Payne. And at that time, playing poker in South Carolina was illegal. And the sheriff/town judge caught them, arrested them. Sorry, Dad, you never want to talk about this. And they were given a choice, 13 weeks of jail time or 13 weeks of church service. One or the other. So Dad being Dad, he made his choice. He grabbed his buddy Jack Dorn and they took off and hit the road and left town. They tried to join the Marines, and the Marines rejected the both of them because they were too skinny. But the Navy signed them up. The Navy signed them up, and it was 6 months prior to December 7th, 1941. He found himself stationed on the USS Yorktown as a fireman, and he ended up being a fireman. He told the story that his buddy, and I can't remember his name now, none of you probably know, said to him as they got through boot camp, let's strike to be firemen because that should be easy because you only have to work when there's a fire. Well, little did the 2 of them know that the fireman aboard ship was deep in the belly of the ship, keeping the boilers burning. And Dad hated that. And that is where he found himself 1 year later on that day in June 1942 in the Battle of Midway in the Pacific Ocean. He was below in the boiler room when the Yorktown was hit by fire bombers and torpedo planes. He managed to get topside just in time to abandon ship, hear the orders to abandon ship. And with the Yorktown, and if you saw the pictures out there up front, it was listing very badly, so they had to jump off the high side of the ship, and he always told the story about they were taught in boot camp that in case you need to abandon ship, I don't know if you still do this, but you're supposed to take your pants off, and you tie the legs of your pants. Do you still do that? You might want to, this might be a lesson learned for the troops. You tie off your pant legs and you hold them over your head head when you jump off, and that way you catch air in your pants, and when you're in the water, you have a makeshift flotation device. Well, Dad's response to that was, well, shit, they didn't tell me that the force of hitting the water was going to rip the pants out of my hands. And I went 20 feet down, and all I saw was pants floating on top of the surface, and then they disappeared. So he said, here I was in the Pacific Ocean with nothing on but a shirt and a pair of skivvies. And he spent hours in the water, literally hours in the water, hanging on to an old apple cart with another sailor. And he said it was the best view of the Battle of Midway you could ever have. He watched the entire thing take place overhead, and then they were picked up by a rescue ship. He was so proud of that experience. Talked about it all the time. After the Yorktown was sunk, he spent the remainder of his service and the war aboard the USS West Virginia, which was restored after being bombed in Pearl Harbor, and they were engaged in a lot more battles in World War II. One day in 1998, this is a true story, while watching a National Geographic special on TV, he saw that oceanographer Bob Ballard had found the Yorktown on the bottom of the Pacific at 16,000 feet. I know it was 1998 because I looked it up. And Dad was never one to miss an opportunity for a laugh and maybe a little recompense on his part. So he literally sent Bob Ballard a letter. And he says, on your next trip down there, go to locker number 33. He says, I got a brand new pair of shoes in there. I just shined and never got to wear them. I'd like to have them back. Strangely, he never heard back from him. After the war, Dad went into the car business, and many of his friends from those days are here today, and thank you for that. He joined Smith Gandy Ford in downtown Seattle as a car hop in the early 50s, and by the 60s he had worked his way to the top and was general manager until it closed its doors in the 70s. And then Dad went on later to work and have a successful career at American Lease, which was part of Bill Pierre Ford in Little Old Lake City, only minutes away. And if you're old enough to remember that jingle, that's good. I'm sure Billy and Jamie remember that jingle. So all of this from a southern boy with a great school education, who came up and out of the Depression with nothing more than basically sheer determination. And I may be biased when I say this, but as a salesman, I don't think he had a rival on this planet. Breathe. He always said, son, you don't sell the steak, you sell the sizzle. And his favorite story about selling a car was a story about Thurlow, as he liked to call him. And this was a guy that came monthly to the car lot. He was a looky-loo. He never had any intention of buying a car. He just wanted to come look. And none of the salesmen ever wanted to take this guy as their up because they knew it was a no-win. They weren't going to sell and they were going to miss another opportunity. So Dad said, let me take this one. He says, I'll take this one today and I'm going to sell this guy a car right now. So as the other salesman watched from the showroom windows, Dad started talking to him. Soon the guy was nodding his head, walking around one car in particular. They took it for a test drive, and when they came back, the guy bought the car. Dad came in after the guy had driven off, and the other salesman wanted to know, what in the heck did you finally do to get that guy to buy a car? And Dad smiled and said he had simply mentioned to the man that this particular used car actually had the same wheelbase dimensions as it did the day it came off the assembly line. That was the sizzle, and the customer bought the steak. So, our dad was blessed, to say the least. Whether it was his ability to appreciate his life in Kershaw, South Carolina, and Donna knows this, Every morning he wrote Kershaw, South Carolina on a piece of paper somewhere, usually on the newspaper next to the crossword puzzle. Growing up, I can remember seeing that every day, every single day. He was blessed to survive the war. He was blessed with the ability to engage people at all levels, befriending them and gaining their friendship and admiration. He was blessed to recover through some very difficult times in his life to eventually find God, where they crafted a beautiful marriage and loving friendship for the last 34 years. He was blessed on the golf course, which he loved so much. He shot his, now think about this if you're a golfer, or even if you're not. He shot his age on the golf course from the age of 71 to 85. He was a putting machine. Just when you thought you had him beat on a hole, he would drop a 30-footer for a par or birdie. Quite frankly, I never beat my dad at golf. It kills me to say that. And I didn't inherit, obviously, and some of my friends out here, Johnny and Hanky and Randy know, Terry, that I didn't inherit his golfing talent. One day before a tournament, and this is true, I was going to a fancy golf course in a tournament, and I didn't want to make a fool out of myself, so I called him up the night before. And I told my dad, I need a little advice. This is kind of a big day. I don't want to embarrass myself. What kind of advice can you give me as I go out to this tournament? There was a pause. He said, son, pray for rain. That hurt. He was blessed at the casino, and I got to tell you, there's too many stories to relate about that here. But he loved to gamble, and he loved the friends that he made at the Angel of the Winds Casino right up the road. He loved those people. They loved him. He was blessed to have a loving family and a huge network of friends from every aspect of his life, and everyone he encountered, it was a mutual respect. Okay, here's where I can breathe a little bit. He was a great father. He and I, and I'm only speaking for myself, he and I were able to do so many meaningful things together. We golfed together, we gambled together, we traveled together. That's a whole other story. And literally, he gave me advice every day. I called him every day and got advice every morning. And we shared a lot of stories. And so I want to leave you with this one last story that will let you know that he was the same man that you all knew up to the very end. As he was preparing to die and leave this earth about a week or so before he passed, Dad asked Donna to have a pastor brought in so he could talk to him. I showed up at the house as they were just finishing up their conversation. And in fact, you might find this surprising, but Dad was just finishing up telling him a story. As Donna escorted the pastor to the door, I sat down next to Dad on the bed, and I said, Dad, what was that all about? And Dad said, well, I told him a few stories about myself, and I told the pastor that I wasn't a church-going man, but that I was a believer and always had been. And I looked at Dad, and we exchanged a knowing look that we had exchanged many, many times. And I said, Dad, was that conversation with the pastor just to make sure you got your foot in the door? And he just looked at me and he smiled and he said, I believe I did. And I would say, yes, Dad, you did. So, we love you. And here's to you, G.W. Horton, to a life well lived. So we have a little change in the program. My oldest brother Patrick is going to grab the microphone and say a little something. And thank you. It's coming. Breathe.
Don't start. Okay. Well, I don't know where the microphone is, but I want to thank Jim Shipman for all his help in the mortuary. He's done a wonderful job up here. And my brothers and sisters, they've done a wonderful job. Breathe. Now,
A little closer.
no, a little closer, I'm sorry. You're probably all wondering why I have a golf club. Let me tell you a story. All the years that we have played with our dad golf, we've never beat him. And one day, sitting in front of the TV, this As Seen on TV ad came on. And I thought, oh, that's cool. This club is going to beat my dad. Finally, I'm going to beat him. So for 99 bucks, I got the club. Went to the golf course with him. And of course he saw it. And he laughed. Nothing is going to beat him, he thinks. So we finally go golfing. And we get out to the first hole. And of course he's Mr. Straight all the time, down the middle. And I think, oh, that's good. If I can outdrive him and get closer, I can beat him. So I get up there, and I hit the ball, and yeah, it goes a long ways in the woods. So, okay, that's fine. That's just the first hole. You got more to go. So we get to the second hole, and he gets up there, boom, straight. Okay. So I hit, boom, oh, he's going a mile that way to the pond. If you've ever golfed at Glen Eagle, there's a lot of water. Anyway, by the end of 18, I still haven't beat him. And to this day, we still haven't beat him. He just always straight. And like Scott said, he's a good putter. It wasn't in the cards. And as hard as we tried, you just couldn't beat him. Anyway, that's my story and my remembering Dad. So I just want to thank everybody for being here today. It's very nice. And we appreciate it. Thank you. Graham?
Well, hi everybody. So I'm Grant Haugen, Grant William Haugen, George Washington Horton's grandson, aka GWH Jr. And so I didn't write anything down today. As I thought about what I would say here, I heard Grandpa just tell me from the heart, Slick, from the heart. So that's what I'm going to do. And I know I'll probably end up looking like a bad politician compared to Scott. 45-minute long speech that was awesome. Good job. But, you know, it's funny when people we love are with us, we appreciate them and we love them. But when they're gone, we analyze their life and we truly understand their legacy. And that's what the last couple weeks have done for me. My grandfather's story is a story of vigilance, perseverance, honor, gratitude, and love. He's been an inspiration to me since the time I could talk, and he has been until the day he passed away. I always would call him with anything I needed help with, whether it was advice on a job, advice in sales. I made my career in sales and looked to him for guidance, because I truly believe that my grandfather was the best salesman that ever walked the face of the earth. True salesman. And he sold every day, all day, because he made people feel good. And he showed them love, whether it was the first moment he met them or he'd known them for years. Growing up, my fondest memories were at the old Kenmore house. I remember the garden that my grandma and grandpa had. And I used to love to go out and pick strawberries. And I really got a kick out of when I was probably 7 years old, maybe 8. And my grandfather allowed me to use his motorized tiller. And I thought that was the greatest thing since sliced bread. So I was out there and he just let me do it. And I was running it, and I got the whole darn thing tilled. And then I went back and he came out to check it out and he said, "Did you till over there?" And there were seeds there. But you know what? It's okay. Because it made me feel good that he let me do that. He carved a big pumpkin one time. Huge pumpkin. It was this big. And he took my little body and set me up inside of it. And I still have that picture somewhere. And I remember it clear as day. I remember his shop that they had built in the backyard. And how I'd go over and he used to be back there making noise, and the lights would be on, and he'd be in there doing something. And I always used to love to run out there and just sit and be with him and watch him work. Later in life, he would call me out of the blue. I'd get very busy. I'd only see him on Christmas and Easter and holidays and birthdays. And I always hated that I didn't make the time. But he did. I also, I met my fiancée Brooke 4 years ago, and he always had respect and cared about the girls, the girlfriends, and things like that. But he could tell something was different. And he would always call and check on her through me, ask how she's doing. He cared so much about rodeo. And her daughter, Natalie. I don't have a daughter of my own. Natalie's my daughter. And Natalie was his granddaughter. Because he treated her just like it. There's a tissue up here. In his last couple weeks, it was awesome. Sorry, guys. In his last week, Natalie went up to visit him, and he was having a rough day and feel good. And when she walked in, boy did his face light up, and he started smiling. And he lit up the room and totally changed the environment. And they hugged, and she laid on his stomach. And I was glad that he had the opportunity to meet my daughter and be with us that long, because we're very lucky for that he was here. Every year, I received, and I'm sure many of the grandchildren here have, the ice cream cone. And even this year, my birthday tomorrow, I still got a card from my grandma. You know, it was hard to not see Grandpa's signature on there, but I felt it. And I know he's still with us here right now. So we're all supposed to be smiling and laughing, so I'll start cranking out the jokes. Oh, Scott took them all. And the last thing that I want to say is that he always looked on the bright side of things. And a week before he passed, Ashley had gone up to visit him. And he grabbed her hand before she left. And he said, "At least I will go with the image of my beautiful